My name is Thomas Edward Keller. I grew up in a small town called Enid, Oklahoma, the kind of place where everyone knew your name, where the summers smelled like dry grass and motor oil, and where the biggest news of the week was usually whose dog had gotten loose down on Maple Street. I was 19 years old when I shipped out. 19. I didn't know what war looked like. I had heard it on the radio. I had read about it in the papers. But I had never felt it in my chest. That hollow, vibrating feeling that comes when the world stops being ordinary and starts being something you can't explain to anyone who wasn't there. My mother held me for a long time the morning I left. She didn't cry, not in front of me anyway. My father shook my hand, just once, firm, the way men did it back then. He looked me in the eye and didn't say a word. That silence said everything. I have thought about that handshake nearly every day for the past 80 years. There are moments in life that have no words, and that was one of them. I was assigned to the USS Laffey, a destroyer, DD 724. I didn't know much about ships when I got there. I had grown up 2,000 miles from any ocean, but I learned fast. You learn fast in the Navy because you have to. The ocean doesn't care whether you're ready or not. The war doesn't care whether you're ready or not. You either adapt or you disappear. By early 1945, it was clear that the Pacific War was entering its final and most violent phase. The Allied forces were pushing steadily toward Japan. Island by island, mile by mile, we were closing in, and Japan knew it. They knew that if Okinawa fell, the path to the Japanese home islands would be open, so they prepared something that, frankly, none of us had ever encountered before. Something that defied every military logic we had been trained to understand. Something that scared us not because of its power, but because of what it meant. Kamikaze. The word itself comes from Japanese. It means divine wind. It refers to a legendary typhoon that supposedly destroyed a Mongol fleet attempting to invade Japan centuries ago. The Japanese military took that word and gave it new meaning. They turned it into a weapon. But here is what I need you to understand. A kamikaze was not just a weapon. It was a human being, a young man, usually barely older than I was, who had volunteered, or in many cases been pressured, to climb into a plane loaded with explosives and fly it directly into an enemy ship. No return, no survival, just impact. I have spent decades trying to reconcile that, and I'll tell you honestly, I still haven't fully managed it. We arrived in the waters near Okinawa in the spring of 1945. The atmosphere on the ship had changed. You could feel it in the way men talked, shorter sentences, fewer jokes. You could feel it in the way the officers briefed us each morning, more precise, more urgent. The kamikaze attacks had been escalating for months. Other ships in our fleet had been hit. Some had sunk. The USS St. Lo, the USS Bismarck Sea, names that circulated among us like warnings. Every sailor knew those names. Every sailor understood what they meant. On the morning of April 6, 1945, I woke up before general quarters. Something felt wrong. I can't explain it better than that. The air felt different. I was 19 years old, and I had no special training in premonition or instinct, but something in my body told me to be awake before the alarm sounded. So I was already half-dressed when the call came. General quarters, all hands to battle stations. I ran. The whole ship was running. Boots on metal, hatches slamming, the sound of men moving with absolute purpose. My station was a 20mm anti-aircraft gun on the port side. I got there in under a minute. My gun crew was already assembling. Next to me was a man named Joe Collins, a Texan, big laugh, always had a story. He looked at me when I arrived and said 2 words, "Stay sharp." That was it. That was Joe Collins' entire speech before the most violent 80 minutes of my life. They came from every direction. Not 1, not 2, not 5. 22 kamikaze aircraft targeted the USS Laffey that morning. 22. Our combat air patrol was up, our own fighter planes circling above us trying to intercept them. They got some, but not all. The ones that got through came low and fast, using cloud cover to mask their approach, dropping out of the sky at angles that made our guns strain to track them. And when you have a targeting solution and you fire, and the plane doesn't deviate, doesn't turn, doesn't try to escape, that's when the cold reality of what you're dealing with settles into your bones. These pilots were not trying to survive. The first plane I clearly remember came from the port side, banking hard and dropping fast. Our whole crew opened up on it. Tracers lit the air. The noise was beyond description. The combined roar of anti-aircraft fire, the scream of the incoming engine, the explosions from other parts of the ship where we had already been hit. And in the middle of all of that noise, I saw the pilot's face. I know that sounds impossible at that distance, at that speed, but I saw it. A young man, eyes forward, completely still, not angry, not afraid, just resolved. He was younger than me, I think, or maybe the same age. I will never know his name. That plane missed us by perhaps 30 feet and hit the water just off our stern. The explosion threw me against the railing hard enough that I lost my footing. Water came down like a wall. Fire scattered across the surface of the ocean. I got back up. I got back on the gun. The second plane hit us. It struck the aft section, the rear of the ship. The impact traveled through the entire vessel like a shockwave. I felt it in my feet, in my legs, in my teeth. Then came the fire, then came the smoke, and then came the sounds that I have never been able to forget. The sounds of men in pain, calling out from sections of the ship I couldn't see. You train for this. You are told what to do in every scenario, but nothing in any training manual prepares you for the specific weight of hearing your crewmates call out from inside a burning ship and knowing that your job, your only job, is to stay on the gun. So I stayed on the gun. Joe Collins stayed on the gun. Every man in my crew stayed on the gun. The attacks continued. A third plane, a fourth. A fifth came straight down from above, nearly vertical, as if it had simply decided to fall out of the sky on top of us. Our guns tracked it. We fired. It clipped our mast and exploded just off the starboard side. The concussion knocked 2 men off their feet. They got back up. They always got back up. I want to tell you about a man named Henry Larson. Henry was from Minnesota, a farm kid like a lot of us. The night before April 6th, we sat together near the berthing compartment and talked for maybe an hour. He told me about his parents' farm. He told me about a dog named Buster who used to chase the tractor. He told me he was going to open a hardware store when he got home. Said he'd always liked fixing things, liked the logic of it, the way a broken thing could be made whole again. He was laughing when he said it. I remember that specifically. He was laughing. The next morning, Henry Larson was killed in the fires that burned through the aft section of the ship. He was 21 years old. He never got to open that hardware store. Buster never saw him come home. I have thought about Henry Larson almost every day since April 6, 1945. The engagement lasted 80 minutes. 80 minutes that felt simultaneously like 8 seconds and 8 years. When the last plane was down, when the guns went quiet, when the smoke began, slowly, painfully slowly, to thin, I sat down on the deck, right there, next to my gun. I couldn't stand anymore. Not because I was hurt, I wasn't, not badly, but because my body had spent 80 minutes operating at a level of intensity that it had never been designed to sustain, and when that intensity lifted, there was nothing left. Joe Collins came over and sat next to me. He didn't say anything. He just put his hand on my shoulder and left it there. That was enough. The final count from that day. 22 Kamikaze aircraft had attacked USS Laffey. We were hit 6 times by aircraft and struck by 4 bombs. 32 of our crew were killed. 71 were wounded. Large sections of the ship were destroyed or on fire. And yet, the USS Laffey did not sink. She stayed afloat. She was eventually towed to safety and repaired. In the years that followed, she would be called the ship that would not die. I have always thought that was the right name. Though I want to be precise about something. Ships don't survive. Men do. It was the 32 men who died on that ship who kept the rest of us alive. It was their sacrifice, whether they had a choice in it or not, that gave the Laffy her name. The war ended in August of 1945. Japan surrendered. The world exhaled, a collective relief that you could almost feel traveling across the ocean like a wave. I was somewhere in the Pacific when we got the news. I remember men cheering. I remember a kind of wild, disbelieving joy spreading across the ship. And I felt it too. I did. But beneath the joy, there was something else, something quieter, something that didn't have a name yet in 1945. We didn't have words like trauma or PTSD back then. We just called it the nerves, or we didn't call it anything. We just carried it home. I got back to Enid, Oklahoma in the fall of 1945. My mother hugged me at the front door for a long time, longer than when I had left, which I hadn't thought was possible. My father shook my hand again, but this time his eyes were wet. The house smelled exactly the same as I remembered. The same wallpaper in the kitchen, the same creak in the third stair. Everything the same, except me. I was not the same 19-year-old boy who had left. I was 20 years old and I had watched men die. I had looked into the face of a young man who had chosen, or been told, to trade his life for a chance to take mine. I had sat on the deck of a burning ship and kept firing because there was nothing else to do. You don't come home from that unchanged. Nobody does. And for a long time in those post-war years, we didn't talk about it. Not the way people talk about these things now. You went back to work. You built a life. You got married if you were lucky. You had children. You went to church on Sundays. And somewhere underneath all of that ordinary living, you carried the weight of what you had seen. I married a woman named Dorothy in 1948. She was patient with me in ways I didn't deserve and couldn't fully explain. There were nights when I couldn't sleep, when the sound of a truck backfiring in the street would send my heart into my throat. Dorothy never asked me to explain it. She just stayed. Decades passed. I got older. The world changed in ways that would have been unimaginable to me on that deck in 1945. And slowly, very slowly, I found that I could talk about it. Not to everyone, not all at once, but I could talk about it. And something strange happened when I did. The weight got a little lighter. Not gone, never gone, but lighter. In the 1990s, I visited the USS Laffy. She's a museum ship now, permanently berthed at Patriots Point in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. You can walk her decks, you can see her guns, you can stand where her crew stood on April 6, 1945, and look out at the harbor and try to imagine what it looked like when the sky was full of aircraft that would not turn away. I stood at my old gun station. I put my hand on the barrel, cold metal, same as it always was. I closed my eyes. I heard Joe Collins say, "Stay sharp." I heard the engines of planes that hadn't been in the sky for 50 years. I heard Henry Larson laughing about a hardware store. And I wept. Stood there on the deck of a museum ship on a sunny afternoon in South Carolina, an old man with shaking hands and failing eyes, and I wept like I hadn't wept since I was a boy. Because some things need to come out eventually. Some things wait decades for the right moment, and then they find you, on a quiet afternoon, on a cold metal deck, surrounded by the ghosts of the men you served with. I was asked once, by a journalist, whether I felt any sympathy for the Kamikaze pilots. It was meant to be a provocative question, I think. The kind designed to reveal something unflattering. But I answered it honestly. I said, yes, I do. They were the enemy. That is true. They killed my friends. That is also true. But they were also human beings. They were also somebody's sons. Somebody held them before they shipped out, same as my mother held me. Somebody shook their hand and didn't say the thing they needed to say. They were young men caught inside a machinery of war and ideology that was larger than any of them, just as I was caught inside mine. War does this. It takes ordinary human beings and turns them into instruments of destruction aimed at other ordinary human beings. And then it leaves the survivors to figure out what to do with that. I am 98 years old now. My hands shake. My eyesight is poor. I move slowly and I tire easily. But my memory is something else entirely. The faces are still there. The sounds are still there. April 6th, 1945 is as vivid to me today as it was the morning it happened. Time takes many things. It has not taken that. People sometimes ask me if I was brave that day. I always say the same thing. I don't know. Bravery implies a choice, a moment when you weigh the danger against your fear and consciously decide to go forward anyway. I'm not sure that's what happened on that ship. I think what happened was simpler than bravery, and maybe harder. There was a job to do, and the men beside me were doing it, and so I did it too. That's what you find out about yourself in those moments. Not whether you are brave or cowardly, but whether you are the kind of person who stays. I stayed. So did Joe Collins. So did every man in that crew. We stayed. To the 32 men of the USS Laffey who did not come home on April 6, 1945, I have carried you with me every day since. You are in my first thought in the morning and my last thought at night. The world does not know your names the way it knows the names of generals and presidents, but I know them. And I want you to know, wherever you are, that you are not forgotten. You were never forgotten. Not for a single day. Stay sharp. That's what Joe Collins told me. Stay sharp. It's the best advice I ever received, and it's the only thing I know how to leave you with. This was my story. One sailor, one ship, 80 minutes, a lifetime.